Hello, gremlins! Today I'm drawing another fantasy character based on dice rolls from my D20 and a chart of characteristics I made myself. As always, that chart is linked in the description, and tag me on Instagram, also linked, if you use it to create your own randomly generated character. I started by rolling an 18, so this character will be an elf. This is the second time I've rolled an elf for this species of character, so I hope to make this one very visually different from the last. You can see the other elf I drew in the video linked here. Next I rolled 2 8s in a row, so the elf will have magical healing powers and a griffin as a companion. Rolling a 17 next has decided that that griffin will be a ghost. Finally I rolled a 15, so the elf's weapon of choice will be a rapier. Starting off, I decided to make this elf feminine presenting, in contrast to the masculine elf I drew before. She is walking toward the viewer with a sword in one hand and the form of a griffin floating in the air behind her. I'm getting quite good at drawing griffins from memory now. I've had a lot of practice at it recently. While I didn't need reference images for the griffin, I did need reference images for the sword. Rapiers have very fancy and complicated handles, and while the handle I gave this elf is fairly simplified, it still has several spiraling metal filaments around her hand. I tend to prefer the look of simpler swords, like a short sword, but rapiers are very cool and elegant, if complicated to draw. I gave this elf a flowing dress inspired by the costumes of the elves in The Lord of the Rings. Her look is specifically inspired by the elves of Rivendell, as I kept an autumnal colour palette when I reached the colouring stage. The dress has trailing cape sleeves and a floor-length skirt. It's belted at the waist with a sash that has a golden clasp that I hoped to make shaped like intertwining vines, although I later simplified it to remove the leaves. Around the ends of the sleeve and the hem of the skirt are asymmetrical floral motifs with curlicules and the shape of leaves. I also gave this elf lady some elegant jewellery. She has a leaf-shaped pendant necklace, a beaded choker with a jewel at the throat, and a circlet of more intertwined gold with another gemstone at the forehead. Her hair is long and straight, flowing down to her lower back. One element I didn't include in this art piece is evidence of this elf's magical powers. The dice roll told me that she has healing magic, but it was difficult to conceive of a way to indicate that. I didn't want the scene of this image to involve someone injured or sick for her to heal, and the idea of giving her some kind of pouch of medicine felt too similar to the pouch of potions I used in my first drawing in this series. I decided to just leave out the healing magic and focus on the elf herself, her sword, and her ghostly griffin companion. Speaking of that ghostly griffin, while I have drawn a lot of griffins recently, posing her was still difficult. She isn't flying so much as floating, being incorporeal. She's also facing the viewer front on, which is always harder to draw than a side profile when it comes to bird heads. I luckily didn't have to worry too much about the position of her claws, as they are mostly hidden behind the elf's back. In order to make the griffin a little more dynamic, I also overlapped them with the elf in front. Her tail is curled up around her companion's sword arm, and when I get to the colour stage it will be translucent and glowing slightly. Having a transparent being that is both in front and behind an opaque figure is always a little bit complicated, but I like the challenge it provides. I'm continuing to use my newly learned method of line art, using different line thicknesses on different parts of the image to make the end result more dynamic. As I keep practicing this technique, it is becoming quicker to use, which is good, as when I first experimented with it, I was worried it would make the line art take longer than is practical for me keeping up with a weekly schedule. I inked the griffin's outlines in blue for the moment, but was not yet sure of what colour the griffin would be. Typically, ghosts are depicted either in shades of grey or shades of blue, but I wasn't sure if those colours would go with the colours I had planned for the rest of the image. The blue outlines will be changed later in the drawing. They are a temporary colour at this stage. While working on the colouring of the elf, I completely hid the layer the griffin was drawn on. The griffin is rather distracting to work with, so hiding it allowed me to focus only on the elf's colour scheme. I decided that her dress would be mostly a rusty shade of orange, with dark green floral motifs and a green belt. I started by colouring those dark green floral motifs, leaving the dress for later. I'm really proud of these stylized motifs. Patterns on clothing are always a part of drawing that makes me nervous. When those patterns were coloured, I moved on to colouring the many gold elements of this elf's accessories and sword, starting with her belt buckle. The important thing when it comes to colouring gold, or any shiny metal really, is to have very strong contrast between the shadows and the highlights. The shadows of the gold are dark brown, the highlights an almost white shade of yellow. The overlapping, intertwined nature of both the belt buckle and later the circlet made colouring them a little complicated. As well as shadows and highlights from the cast light in this image, I also had to add shadows where the metal overlapped, to keep those elements from looking flat. It was also hard to keep track of which layer I was drawing on, as I kept each section of intertwined pattern on a separate layer to allow that overlap. I finished the jewellery by colouring the gemstones emerald green, then begun to colour the dress. So often I gravitate toward drawing characters in green. It is my favourite colour after all, but I like the change of using green as an accent colour against a different base. Later, it will also look good against a green, nature-based background, although it will be a while before I get to that step. The elf has dark hair, which unintentionally makes her look like Arwen. The Lord of the Rings inspiration in this image isn't very subtle, even when it was unintentional. Only her clothing was supposed to look like it belonged in Rivendell. When I had finished colouring the elf, finishing with her sword, then her pale skin, I returned to the griffin layers, and began puzzling through the problem of colour. I still did not know what colour to make this ghost. My solution was to create several possible colour palettes and see which one best complemented the colours I had already used. My options were a palette of muted blue, 2 orange-based palettes, one where the dark colours would be brown and one where the dark colours would be orange, and the highlights pale, a palette of shades of grey, and a palette of muted green. When I made all these colour palettes slightly transparent, I could immediately eliminate the green palette, as well as one of the oranges. I was still unsure between the 3 options that remained, so I left all 3 as options in the corner, and just started colouring the griffin. After all, it wouldn't be hard to change its colours later. I decided to go with the golden-orange colour palette, and ended up keeping it until the end. It looked better than I had thought it would once I had all the effects in place. For now, I recoloured the griffin's line art in pale gold. One way to make the griffin stand out as a ghost is to make the line art lighter in tone than the colours, rather than darker as I usually do with line art. Colouring the griffin was easy. All the colours are the same hue, just different levels of brightness, and I didn't add any shadows or detail other than the feathers of the wings. The only complicated part of the colouring was the tail, specifically the part of the tail where the colour went from being on the back layer to being on the front. I didn't want the seam to be visible between those 2 layers, but when transparency comes into play, it's hard to avoid. I think I did an okay job of disguising the joint, but if you look closely, you can still see where the front layer of the tail fades away. I had fun with the special effects I applied to the griffin, to emphasize its ghostliness. Behind the shape of the griffin, I created a white blob that vaguely follows the silhouette, with pieces breaking off at the edges. I think of it as some kind of blob of energy that surrounds the griffin. I played more with the special effects later, but for now I moved on to shading the elf. I started by shading her skin. I've continued to experiment with the way I shade skin, using different colour temperatures for highlights and shadows. I made sure on this drawing to emphasize the elf's cheekbones. I don't really have a method for my shading, I just keep adding more colours until it looks good, then blend them all together with a smudge brush. I shaded the head and shoulders first, then did each individual hand. I'm happy with her right hand and head and shoulders, but something about her left hand just doesn't look quite right. However, I couldn't figure out what about it seemed off, nor is it the focus point of the image, so I left it as it was. The rest of the shading is fairly simple, one layer of dark colour on top of everything, which I can erase and blend as needed to create shadows. I finally, in this image, changed my method in a way that I should have adjusted ages ago. I keep having problems where I accidentally get rid of detailed shadows when blending out larger and less detailed shadows in the same area. In this drawing, I did the large sections of shadow first, blended them all until they were smooth, then went back and added the detailed shadows later, so they wouldn't get blended to invisibility. Reordering the process makes it so much easier, and I don't know why I haven't changed my method before now. I also added a little bit of subtle glow around the elf's arms, shoulders, and hair, where the griffin would be shedding light on her back. Then it was time to return to the griffin herself. I decided not to shade the griffin. I think leaving her as flat colours helps with the ghostly and unnatural look. However, I did make parts of her more transparent and other parts more opaque, as if she is fading in and out of visibility. Her head is the most visible, the ends of her wings and back legs less so. I also added a bit of cloudy texture to her colouring. That cloudiness gave me an idea, and I returned to the layer of energy surrounding the griffin, making the edges seem less corporeal by erasing them with the same cloudy textured brush. I then added some golden mist around the griffin, drifting in places to wrap around the elf as well. Before I move on to the background, I want to quickly plug my Etsy store again. I now offer downloadable, high-quality files of the art I create on the channel, as well as hand-painted, upcycled t-shirts. While I'm only able to ship the t-shirts to Canada, the US, and Australia, the digital files should be available anywhere. You can find this elf art piece, as well as some of the art from my more popular and most recent videos, all at the link in my description. Supporting my Etsy really helps me. Now to draw the background of this art piece. Drawing once again from Rivendell references, I place this elf in a place where elegant architecture and nature are blended. She's walking on a path of pale stones, having just walked under an archway glowing with vines, with trees further back in the background. I figured out a good method for drawing flagstone pathways, not too dissimilar to the way I've previously drawn tile floors or checkered carpets. I drew a cluster of stone-shaped blobs in a few similar shades of brown, then used a perspective distortion tool to reshape the cluster into a foreshortened path. I hid the sharp edges of the path with some grass, and added a cast shadow under the elf's feet. I then moved on to the archway, which will have several vines climbing up its pale stone. I drew the woody trunk of the vines first, branching a few times as they coiled up, then set about adding leaves. I actually created a custom Photoshop brush for this part of the drawing. Photoshop already has an ivy leaf brush, but that brush is very transparent, so I used the same shape, but filled it in with opaque black. After some adjusting in the settings of the brush, I can use it almost as a stamp, with varied sizes and orientations of leaves following the path of the vine trunks. I connected those leaves with some brown twigs and shaded the stone beneath them. I really should make more use of custom brushes. They are really easy to make and very useful, but I don't often remember that they exist. Maybe in the future I can make myself some grass brushes to more closely match my art style than the default grass brushes available in Photoshop. If I say it in a script, I'll remember to do it, surely. The rest of the background isn't really very visible behind the griffin's glowing form, so I kept it simple with some very rough trees. By using a mix of my own hand-drawn foliage and custom brushes, as well as some foliage concept brushes from a brush pack I've had for a while, I can make backgrounds very quickly that look fairly detailed and unique. This is a background I'm especially proud of. I think it came together really well. I also added a few patches of leaves in the top corners layered on top of everything else. Often my characters look like they are placed on top of a background rather than being part of the environment, and adding a few background elements to the foreground in front of the character helps combat that. With some addition of light and shadow, the image is done, and I'm really happy with it. I really love these randomly generated character videos. They push me to draw characters and creatures I wouldn't normally think to draw otherwise, and are some of the art pieces I'm most proud of. I think this one might be my favorite of the lot now. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, consider liking and subscribing, and if you use the chart of characteristics I used to make your own character, please tag me on Instagram so I can see it. Until next time, bye!